Next, it's really my pleasure to introduce Dan Narayan, VP of Sales from Exdion. We've all heard at some point that we need to digitize our business, and we think Exdion has a tested and pragmatic approach to help, and so I'll hand it off to Dan.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Just as I bring up my slide, I think what we see here is a core insurance industry challenge of unstructured data. But before that, I think I'd like to say that I would have loved to walk into a big auditorium with a whole number of people sitting there and clapping and spotlights. But today, I think I've had to make do with a 10-inch, what do you call that, a selfie ring in front of me and this false wall behind me. So we'll make do with what we have, but hopefully have an opportunity to catch up with all of you in person as we go from here. So I'd like to start about talking about why we exist as an organization, right? And that leads me to talk about a core industry concern, which is unstructured data. Unstructured data manifests into multiple different problem areas, I would say, along the way, but I'd like to touch on 4 of what we think are the most important that impact our business in a big way. So coverage language is a big thing today. We had the recent COVID pandemic where a lot of insureds realized that they weren't covered enough when those claims came through, and a lot of it was driven by how that language was structured and communicated and understood. So this continues to be a big problem area. And we're talking about process quality, right? Many of the previous speakers did touch on it at different levels, but just as an example, when we processed over 50,000 policies as a sample using our technology, we were able to identify 2 potential E&O errors per policy and about 2.7 endorsements coming out of each one of those policies requiring rework. To talk about claims, well, claims is a very sophisticated area. A lot of technologies are addressing that today. When you look at it from the broker angle, there aren't intelligent technology tools that kind of take that information back to be able to recommend coverages. So that connection isn't necessarily well built today. And we're also seeing a lot of claims today still being paid based on a dollar threshold and not necessarily based on actual coverage determination. And lastly, in terms of people-intense workflows, so if I had to just use that example of 2.7 endorsements, I would say that that's about 30 minutes of time on what we should have ideally done right the first time. And this is being driven by the fact that we're dealing with unstructured data. These are prone to errors, and there's a lot of manual intense activity that this calls for. So what's really happening here is that these challenges are robbing away the human capacity that would have ideally been available for more value enhancing or value enriching tasks. And who's benefiting from this is the heavily invested insurtechs that are gradually nibbling away into the market, because they're able to bring in those digital technologies and kind of create that experience for the clients, where the much larger organizations might tend to suffer because of the agility that these companies are able to bring in. So I'd like to talk about how we actually implemented Exdion Extract, which is our core data extraction platform for a top 25 broker, and how we went through that process for them. So the broker, was a large organization, distributed operations across the East Coast and the central part of the country, different systems, different offices. You know how a typical broker works in terms of the functionalities and distribution. The core challenge that the CEO and the CXO were, the CXO group were kind of looking at and asking to themselves was, how do we win and retain new business in a defined, structured, and scalable way? And how do we ensure we uncover and recognize revenue potential along the entire policy lifecycle as a journey? So what I've done for a better presentation here today, I've kind of broken this down into 3 different groups, just so that I can talk to you about how at each level the Exdion Extract platform has played a role. So at the first stage, which is the point of sale, where the broker is actually in need to display a great level of understanding of the customer's business and risks, the Exdion Extract platform does a fantastic job because it's able to extract information from incumbent policies, pull that information out, and point out coverage gaps based on that client's industry, geography, demography. Could be a set of parameters that we kind of predefine. It's also extracting information from that incumbent policy and doing that intelligently to be able to pre-fill applications that then go over to the carrier. So you're cutting down on the time you spend, and you're also cutting down on potential errors because of manual data entry. What's happening here is that we are creating an advice-driven relationship that's scalable. So technology is backing that up, and it can be done across different teams, different people consistently. As we move on at the next stage, another opportunity to engage with the client and create those revenue upsell opportunities while still keeping the client's best interest in mind is at the quotes level. So the ability that Exdion Extract offers here is to compare multiple quotes, or typically any document across the entire policy lifecycle, right? So it could be submissions, it could be previous policies, it could be different forms and applications that come through, to be able to point out and help the client make an informed decision and a faster decision, and also identify exclusions, additional coverages, and track that back to the insured's choices in the first place. And lastly, from a claim standpoint, the ability to triangulate information coming in from claim documentation, policy documentation, coverage wording, and kind of bringing this information together in a way that it can actually be used or leveraged to make coverage recommendations on a go-forward basis. So in summary, the client was able to realize, I think the biggest objective that we achieved here was the client being able to realize that the alignment with their digital aspirations, right? So that was the biggest thing. And we were able to definitely bring in higher compliance, reduce costs, and kind of create the advantage of being an agency of the future or future-proofing their business model. So now that we covered how the technology impacts a broker, just a couple minutes here on talking about the technology. So Exdion Extract is a comprehensive data extraction platform built for the commercial insurance industry and by commercial insurance industry experts. It's capable of handling pretty much any document across the entire policy lifecycle. And just to talk about some of the distinct areas, the system has been trained on over 2,000 carriers, cutting across 3,000 plus templates. And these are underwriting carriers when I say carriers. So it's a huge corpus that the system has dealt with in terms of the ability for it to read and process, a huge quantum of ISO and carrier-specific forms, and applications. So typically, I think we had some of these points come up in the past as well. So while we expect applications to be standard, there is a lot of dynamically populated data that comes into those. You have nested tables, you have X marks, you have tick marks, and a lot of this information needs to be extracted to make sense of that data that comes through, and our system can do all of that very effectively. Proposals, which are agency-driven, we see a lot of those templates. Each agency has multiple templates, so standardization is still a far cry when you look at it from that point of view. And we've been able to manage all these templates with the training and our technology, and over 90% of these proposals go directly pass through without the need for an external intervention. And from a document type standpoint, we always see that there's still a lot of scanning and scan document pass-through that's a part of our workflow. So our ability to read from scanned documents and extract embedded images is also a key capability that we bring to the table. In summary, well, Exdion Extract is a platform built exclusively for the commercial insurance industry, and I would argue that it's possibly being trained on the largest possible data set. It uses fuzzy logic, and just like any other typical AI system, it kind of tries to identify the best match based on a new document coming in, based on certain thresholds, and if there is an overflow, kind of goes into a queue where there's a smart QA or an expert learning loop that's implemented. As we wrap up, I'll spend a quick minute here on Exdion as an organization. I would describe Exdion as an organization as a very powerful combination of two things. We bring about 15 years, in fact, more than 15 years of deep commercial insurance industry expertise. And we combine that with the technical prowess of a startup. So this is a very unique combination. And I think, we could say that we're one of the very few who bring this to the table. Our core mission is very simple. We look to enable the insurance enterprise to kind of help them become the insurance enterprise of the future and quantify, and kind of help them, fight the digital competition. So that's kind of our objective. And we work with 5 of the top 15 brokers. I mean, some of the companies that have seen value in us are Aon, Marsh & McLennan Agencies, Alliant, Epic, Brown & Brown. So these are some of the companies that we've worked with. We've handled over 3 million insurance documents. We've seen over 10 million insurance transactions. And I think our objective has been to look at a problem as a business user first, and then bring in the technology. So with that being said, I'll wind up. I think I'm up on my time here. And, feel free to reach out to us should there be any questions, as we go from here, or if there's anything we can discuss about.
Thank you, Dan. We'll jump straight into the Q&A. Again, questions can go in the chat, and please, we look forward to seeing your responses in the polls. Dan, you talked about some client examples, a case study. Can you elaborate a little bit on the client experience and how they're utilizing the technology?
Sure. I'd use the example of Exdion Policy Check, which is one of our platforms that was deployed. I'll take the example of a top 15 broker, which had over 125 offices spread across multiple offices. They were kind of looking at a problem of policy checking a process which had kind of become a huge concern for them. They were sitting on a backlog of 139 days. Can you imagine? That's almost 5 months from the day the policy was effective till the time they could get that policy out to their client. A lot of factors contributed to this, but the core problem that they were sitting on was the policy review was kind of becoming a backlog. They couldn't get it out on time. They had distributed operations. They had outsourced a lot of these work, but all that coupled together didn't solve the problem. We implemented Exdion Policy Check, and that 139 came down to sub 10. So 8 or 9 days is kind of the running average at this point. They were able to see 300% lift in terms of how soon they could get these documents out, over 50% reduction in costs. And to give some very specific metrics, what used to take them about 90 minutes in transaction time dropped down to under 12 minutes once the technology came into play. So that was a huge lift that we were able to deliver.
Awesome. Next question. We all know that in automation, really change management is as important as the technology itself. Can you talk a little bit about the complexity of rolling out Exdion and what's required from a change management perspective? Sure.
So, as with anybody trying to take a new technology to the market, the rolling out piece of it, the implementation is the most exciting. We've tried to keep it very, very simple and very well aligned with the operations of the typical client. You might remember me saying that we kind of looked at it as the business user first, and we were incubated in a shared service center for a top 5 broker. So we were a very large operation. We kind of understand the nuances very well. So I think what we really wanted to do was to make this super easy. So we usually start with an office or a region, build champions, and then expand from there. Our usual journey is about 4 to 12 weeks from implementation of the platform. But what we've increasingly seen is our solution wraps around the operational workflow. We have APIs that we can actually use to integrate with the document workflows with our clients, kind of enabling that seamless flow. And we'd like to call that a zero change mechanism, but of course there is change, and we work towards that by customizing the different aspects of the solution, including the outputs, to kind of meet specific needs.
Great. Well, I think that brings us to time. Dan, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the presentation. We've been speaking with Exdion for some time, and you know, every time I pick up a little bit more. So thank you.
Thanks.
Next, we